Okay, thank you, Tyler. Okay, and Brad, right?
Yeah.
All right, I guess it's all yours to do with us as you will.
All right. Well, good evening. Brad Brown here, representing Puget Sound ESD. I'm an executive director in K through post-secondary. If you can't hear or you struggle, just, and I'll project as much as I can through the mask here. So I work with a learning, teaching, family support office, and so I oversee, like I said, K through post-secondary, and we also have elementary, pre-K part as well as another part of LTFS. And then, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Feliciana Peralta. I'm the Executive Director for Equity and Education. And I'm sorry I couldn't be there personally. I'm in a cabin on Mount Hood with my family. And there was a boisterous Monopoly game going on downstairs. So if you hear some screaming, I'm safe. It's the Monopoly playing. It's competitive. So thank you for bearing with us. Trying to be there present with you all as well as being in the mountains. So thank you for kind of creating this space for us to kind of navigate. Just a little bit about me. I've been with Puget Sound ESD for about over a year now as the Executive Director for Equity and Education. And I've been doing this work for quite a long time. I've been doing it in the higher ed system, and then before that in K-12, and started actually in early learning. So been able to kind of really understand and put my mind around and think differently as we grow in the world of equity and what that means, and kind of really thinking differently about systemic, how do we not just do this on a one-to-one, but just on a system level. So yeah, Brad, do we want to go around and kind of like check in and kind of introduce, everybody introduced? And,
Brad, can I interrupt real quick? Yeah, this is an open meeting here. I need to call this order. We'll call this order 1544, and we will stand for the flag salute real quick. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, very good. Then I see I've got the agenda right in front of me.
It's the foggy glasses.
Well,
it's a COVID issue.
I'm having a bad day with the glasses. Okay, I'm sorry, Brad, go ahead.
All right, and well, thank you, Felice. I think too it's important. We'll do the same thing as we go around the room. Is oftentimes reflect on not just our work, but our history, et cetera. And so I'm going to go back again. Brad Brown here. I'm here via North Carolina. That is my home state. That's where all of my families. I've been out here though for the last 20 years, working in K through post-secondary work. I actually started in California working in juvenile justice, California Youth Authority for 6 years prior to moving to Washington, and where I started out working for Seattle Housing Authority, a place for displaced families and children, and then started for Seattle Public Schools and worked for Auburn and also Tacoma. And prior to this, I worked at Kent before coming here. I've been everything from a coordinator, a teacher, assistant principal, and a principal supervisor working in central office. So my blessing is I've had a chance to work in juvenile justice, CBO, and kind of come full circle through the system. So seeing, knowing, learning how our system works, and also seeing some places and where people had opportunity and be part of teams where we've seen also the system improve in terms of outcomes, for children and families. So that's kind of my idea. Lisa, you done? Okay, do you have me go back? And then if we could, just to learn a little bit about you good folks and who you are and how you got to be at this table.
Right. You want to start, Matt?
Sure.
Let's go around this way.
So, Matt Marshall, I guess we want to go in the background as well?
Yeah.
Okay. Washington's my home state, born in Seattle. Kind of lived all across the state from Yakima to Spokane. Lived in Oregon for a while, going through a firefighter EMS internship. Joined the military when I couldn't afford college. Spent many years in the military, well over a decade. Got lots of education there. Spent many years in North Carolina in Fayetteville, Fort Bragg. Left the military, came back here to Washington State, working in medicine. I got a good job in Olympia here. And, my kids all go to the school. I had always been drawn to education. I'm actually an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland, teaching the Department of Natural Sciences, and decided that I wanted to be as involved as possible in the school system and making sure all kids get a good education and seeing really good things happen here in Eatonville. I was glad to join this board. So here I am.
My name is Jeff Lucas. I grew up here in Eatonville, and I'm a firefighter paramedic in Bonnie Lake. Been doing that for, December 1st will be my 30th year. And let's see, I've got 2 kids in school here in Eatonville, and so like Matt, I got into the school board I think 8 or maybe 9 years ago now, just to kind of leave my thumbprint on things and see that we do the most good for the most kids, and I think we've been doing a pretty good job of it. So it's me in a nutshell.
Well, I'm going to keep with the medical theme here just a little bit. I came to Eatonville in 1976 as a medical assistant for Dr. Van Eaton, and married my husband, and who was an Eatonville high school graduate, and lived here and lived in other places, and eventually became a teacher and a principal, and came back to Eatonville, and I was a principal here for 19 years at Eatonville Elementary, and I've made the jump to the big house. And I'm currently finishing my second week as the Director of Teaching and Learning, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Alternative Education. So, and I'm just really excited to be here and begin my work with DEI. Actually, it started last week, but I continue to work.
My name is Rhonda Woodsberger. I was raised in Eatonville, also a graduate from Eatonville Schools. I have 5 children who have attended here. I have no medical connection myself. My son is a doctor, so there you go. There's my medical tie-in. I've been very honored to work in this community and with this board, because I do feel like it focuses kids first, and the opportunity to be really open-minded and to grow in that growth mindset that we encourage in our children. I believe we encourage in our board as well. And I'm really happy to have this opportunity to move our work forward with you. Thank you, Brad.
I'm Paulette Giliardi, and I'm the historical figure on the board. I was born and raised here, and went to school here, and my 4 kids in school here. I have grandsons. So my grandson is a senior this year. And so I got involved with schools. I have younger brothers who were born when I was a teenager, and I followed them in their school sports and got involved in their sports programs and that kind of stuff. And then when my kids came along in school, followed them, volunteered, and volunteered quite a bit at the time, and kind of evolved into school board and been here a long time.
Well, and I know, Jeff, you said you have other folks that will be joining later.
Yes, Lisa couldn't get out of work. She's going to be about an hour late. And Crescent is also finishing up a meeting in her office, so she'll be here in a few minutes, it sounds like.
All right, Elise.
Great. So I kind of wanted to, before we begin with the presentation, just do a heart and mind check. what's on our hearts and what's on our minds. I know there's a lot going on within our country, and in doing this work, we like just to see how people are doing. So for me, what's on my heart is really thinking about being with my family and connecting, but also what is happening around the nation, and hoping that the outcome for regardless of the outcome, that we move forward within the country. What's on my mind is hoping that this internet connection continues and is strong, and that this works out. So I'm hoping that I can't see anyone, but being able to kind of connect with you all from afar. So that's on my mind as well. So this work is relational, and it's really hard to build relationships online, but I feel like we're doing the best we can, no matter if we're in space together or not. So that's what is on my heart and mind. Brad, would you like to go, or would you like to?
We'll keep the same order. Okay, and so in our practice, this is something we practice back at the AD, because what we learn when we start talking about change isn't just paper. We have plenty of paper. We can go through a training, have policy, et cetera, but it's like trying to keep a healthy culture to where communication is essential within that. So that's why we do hearts and minds, so that if someone is in a different space, it gives you an opportunity to understand and see that person for what they bring to the table, because we can all be bringing something different to the table within the space. And so for me, it is an interesting time within our country. We don't shy away from that. It has different implications for different people for different reasons. But at the end of the day, for me, it's just like, I'm really excited and also nervous about this weekend, because I'll be alone with the children, and I'm hoping that I don't forget a practice, or leave someone over to someone else or something. But really, that's at heart. And then also too, I'm very blessed to still have two older parents that are alive, and so their health is always in my forefront, and they're back in North Carolina, and so I don't want to take time for granted, and so I just, so I was on.
Well, I guess the first thing would be, I think all of us are concerned as far as what's going on in the country right now. And really what's on my heart is I hope, regardless of outcome, that people can come together and find it as a unifying force regardless. That's really been heavy on my heart. What's on my mind is it's my wife's birthday weekend, and we have a weekend away from the kids. So when we're done here, we'll leave town. So that's on my heart.
You always saw how good you remember. That's always a good one.
And have plans.
You are good. Right on. I think for me, my heart's been pretty good. My family's been happy, healthy. We've been largely unaffected by all the stuff going on these days. We're got a good job. We're all healthy. We're all happy. It's just inconvenienced our lives, and our problems are small. So we feel very blessed to have the problems we do. But my mind is probably on the same wavelength as most people these days. Just wondering how we're going to get this uncertainty shaken out, and really hope whatever happens, get America back into a groove again, get some communities back in a groove, and make some things happen for the better.
Okay, well, right now, just being in the middle of it all day, all week, my heart's with the students that are struggling at home. I've been hearing stories from teachers about their mental health and the conditions some of these kids are in, and even our kids that come from what we would call not needing a lot at home, they're struggling emotionally, and that's where my heart is these poor kids, and so that's where my heart's been, and my mind is completely kind of weird places. hoping I'm not crazy because I'm decorating for Christmas this weekend. I think that's part of my heart. I need happiness and joy, and my little things bring me that. So, am I crazy? I don't know.
There's a whole bunch of you doing that. My heart, family. On my mind, I think, hoping that through all of this, whatever crazy everybody's attacking, that respect and honor, respect for our differences, and that they make us unique and special and important, and opinions will continue in this community, that we can agree to disagree and have civil discourse and still really have great, deep friendships and move important work forward.
Okay, my heart, which has been for a long time, is with kids, and not just with my own, but with all children. And the thing that's been heaviest on my heart through all of this is the kids who are being neglected, the kids who are maybe being abused. And it's been a prayer of mine every day for protection and provision for them. And I know that getting them back in school is the best thing to do, and getting them in a safe place is the thing we need to do. And so I'm, I really want to see that happen as quickly and as well as we can do it, and be able to have kids in a place where they can learn and they can grow and they can be secure and in a better place for them too. So that's kind of where my heart and my mind is. And my mind is agreeing with everyone here is for people to respect differences, to respect one another, and to work together would be good.
Yeah. So that's one thing about our Region 121. I mean, we're the largest, we'll go into that region. And it's so different from within 5 miles. You have completely different context. But one thing is consistent is, there's always a need for students.
Mm-hmm.
It could be an apartment building, or it could be a 2-story house. Doesn't always tell the story in terms of needs for students and even for our staff, because they hurt the kids. I mean, they're the reason people chose this profession. And so, trying to keep everyone safe, and not just safe, but I think someone said, taking care of people's mental health. And this is an interesting time of year. And so, doing those things, Diane, that may not sound right, but if you want to do Christmas, we are, and Jeff, your word was unprecedented time. And so, we have to do things to take care of ourselves. And when you're in the line of service, you definitely have to take care of yourself, because that's your job. It's how can you, right, serve others if you're not well? So keeping that in the forefront, but I appreciate that. All right, please.
All right, so are we ready to start the PowerPoint? Brad, I can't see you, so I'm
Yeah.
I thought you said Zooming. I was like,
We are too.
I can see you. That was one of my TV. My team can't hear me. No.
So give me a moment to bring this back up. Okay, I think you can see this. I'm not sure.
Yes,
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. I can't see you all, so let me see here.
You can't see us. It has a little thing up in the top corner. On our screen, please.
It's not coming up in. Hold on, let me see this. Nope. But we're gonna roll with this and see how this goes. All right. So, but you can see me and the PowerPoint, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. So we're going to start with a land acknowledgement, and this is just our way to really acknowledge our ancestral lands and really and people. And so we do this lots of different ways in engagement of this, and a lot of this is really just kind of centering and grounding ourselves in that. And so we have Kayla, who was amazing to kind of do a great video for us to kind of talk about that. So I'm gonna, oh gosh, please work. Okay, let's see if this works here. Okay. Well, are you? Hold on. Please work, please work. Well, I'm gonna do this. Here it is. Oh. Okay, hold on. What are you able to see?
We see a PowerPoint and it's going out, please.
Okay. I'm sorry about technology. Oh.
Good day. My name is Kayla Guyette, and I just did a small version of a traditional introduction here in the Pacific.
Okay, so I'm not going to continue to do that because I can send that to you all. But basically, it's really just kind of grounding us in the ancestral work and really thinking about the seventh generation. When we talk about the seventh generation and how we move forward with thinking about what policies and what thoughts and what work we're doing today will move forward for the seventh generation. So it's not, when we do land acknowledgements, it's not just acknowledging the ancestral land and whose people we are here and on thankful for, but it's also what we're doing for and movement of. So the kids that we have now in our schools, what are we leaving for the seventh generation, the next group of kiddos? So here's a little, I'm going to try this video with that talks about the seventh generation thinking.
My grandfather said, each human being is 5 generations. If you're lucky, you experience your grandparents, your parents, your generation, your children's generation, and if you're lucky, your grandchildren's generation. You are 5 generations walking. The 6th generation is everybody who ever came before you. Your ancestry back to the end of time, and you should respect that and know it and honor it. 7th generation, anybody who's ever coming after you. Anybody who's ever coming after you. So when we say make a decision with the 7 generations in mind, what decision do you make that is not made for all time? So careful as you move through the world. And this should be a lesson for our policymakers and our leadership. No decision they make is not a decision for all time.
All right. So I can't see your hand, so I'm hoping you're all thinking, do you know whose ancestral land either you work on, or that you're currently on, or that was ancestral? If anybody can shout out that.
We're on the Nisqually tribal land.
Eatonville is the Michelle clan of the Nisqually tribe, and close to the Eatonville, the greater Eatonville area, there's a lot of Puyallup influence as well.
Awesome. Do you have relationships with the tribes, the nations that are around there?
Yes.
Yeah. Would you like to talk a little bit about what that looks like in that relationship?
For the most part, we're in a partnership with natural resources, restoring a lot of salmon runs and old riverbeds to original courses, and just kind of redeeming the countryside like that is our primary focus.
Awesome. We like to talk about that just so, we are centered in that, but also, what does that mean for our education system with those relationships? Are they being centered? Are they a relationship, or is it something transactional? And I'm so thankful to hear, unfortunately, a lot of our region, but not our region with our, in our nation, that isn't happening. So we know that when we start thinking about our relationships and what that would look like and what that looks like in partnership, that changes how we engage things. So I'm really excited for y'all. So good, continue that. All right. So let's go to
My grandfather.
Oops, there we go. So Brad, would you like to talk about this slide?
So this is end of my, this is going to my third year with the ESD. And one of the reasons that I chose the ESD, like many of you, was their goal to successfully, close some of the opportunity gaps via racial equity. And that has been, not only have they led within this region, but that has also been a national issue. But I can proudly say that, again, prior to me coming on board and continue, that this has been focus and support, just like working with different tribes, different CBOs. We also work with different school districts, charters, etc. Because at the end of the day, we're centering children, know that our children won't stay in the same lanes, if you will, that we stay. Down here it says becoming an anti-racist, multicultural organization. We affectionately call that an arm code, and we lead racial equity, but we also know there's various types of equity, and even within different ethnic groups. There's always an opportunity to lift up multicultural opportunities, and we understand this thing called intersectionality, so that we know that people aren't quote unquote one-dimensional. You can be male, and you can be gay, and you can be, right? And so it's like, what does that look like as our world is changing, and what does that look like for our students? And how do we create that safe space? And that's where this work is a necessity for students and for adults. And again, that's going back to the 7 generations. How do we put policies in place where students are, again, safe and can learn and have the same opportunities that all students have? Next slide, please. For a second, just go. If you go to the next one, I'll pull all this together really quickly. And one of this has kind of what was in the other slide. This right here is for me super important, because I work with a lot of different groups in a lot of different organizations, and some are very well-to-do, and I imagine some of the largest. Anyway, they talk about strategy, And they'll say, well, best practices. They'll talk about all of those things. Well, those things grow inside of something called a culture. And essentially, that is what we have to continually to work on and build in a school as a culture. And it could be the culture of just basic respect for differences. And the culture could be of, hey, we don't tolerate certain behaviors because we know it causes harm, right? And so when we talk about equity and we talk about where does that live, where does that thrive, and how do we get here, and how do we move forward, it's what policies, and I'm speaking here, what policies, as you put these things in place, how are you building that culture? How are you modeling and messaging that culture? One of the things that we look forward to do is, one, we have to put it out there, like name it and claim it. So I took the liberty of printing out Eatonville's mission. Together we commit to inspiring lifelong learners to create a better future. And that said, and then thinking about your positions, how are you individually creating that culture? And that's not just in the policy, but that's also in terms of how you engage, and that's also how you message to your communities. And that's creating that culture. And I know one of the reasons we're here tonight is because my understanding is that's the culture you want to create, right? For all your students. So, and I kind of like the vision too, I'll read that. Our vision is for all students to graduate with the knowledge and skills to succeed in our community and global society. And I highlight global society. We must inspire, allow innovation, create safe and strong academic opportunities to allow all students to realize success and thrive in the 21st century workplace. So, this is a great example of, and you're going to hear me continually talk about 7 generations. I know we're in a pandemic right now. I know elections got it. And what I'm saying is that's going to pass. So when we're getting into this work, this is the stuff we're talking about in terms of global, where your grandchildren are going to be working, where your son going to be working, and then how do we create a culture so regardless of where they choose to work, they work and walk in a way that is still within the values that you hold true here to Eatonville. And so that is the mindset in terms of which you want to do this walk. And then you have your core values down here: curiosity, excellence, responsibility, character, and equity as we move through this. So these are our tenets. Feel free to look back at those, but I just want to put an emphasis on the culture. Policy is one step. It is not an answer. It is how constantly think about how you build a culture. And 2 ways to talk about that is model and message, right? Yeah. So I'm going to put that. That's just so important.
Brad, I think I like that idea of that we really should be creating the culture before we even back that up with policy. I think it should be that order. So I appreciate that.
Brad can see it.
Yeah.
Feliciana can.
Hi, Feliciana.
She can't. I don't think she can.
Hi, I'm so sorry I'm not there with you all and navigating Google Meets, but hi.
So, and then we're going to try to, so with that idea of culture, we built in some agreements. The next slide, please, Scott.
All right. So as you build culture, thank you Brad, so much for putting in there. We know a couple of things to be true, and one of those things is building your why, which is our end, which is success for each child by eliminating the equity opportunity gap for racial equity, and that's our why. And our how, a lot of times, are building in practices that we can kind of really engage tough conversations, no matter what conversations they are. And a lot of times that is the toughest thing to do. But we know common language and having practices, and we call them the agreements. And these agreements that we have, they came from Singleton, the Courageous Conversation book. But we know that these are extremely important when we have conversations or making decisions or an everyday way of doing things. In fact, these are so important in our executive leadership meetings. We when we were all together, we had them in front of us constantly, so we can go back and look and have those agreements in front of us. So, Brad and I are going to go through them. Please feel free to ask us questions. So to stay engaged, this one I'm going to say is so harder to do now in remote living, and definitely staying engaged when you have so many competing for your attention. Things are competing, especially in those tough moments when we have our phones ringing at the same time or on Zoom at the same time. So disengaging, and also there's moments of disengagement, but checking with our hearts and minds, and staying engaged in those tough moments and tough conversations, explicitly around systems of oppression. So don't let your heart and mind check out, and also reflect why. Why is that happening? Is it something because I have to take a moment to breathe, or is it, oh, this is too much for me, I'm going to check out? So it's staying engaged, even when it feels hard. Would you like to do the next one, Brad?
Yep, experience discomfort. People may think because I'm a 6'6" bald black man that race is an easy conversation, but it's not. Some days it is, some days it's not. That's my truth. I do enjoy when people are naturally curious. No different than I have my own learning. I have a friend which I'm trying to learn more about how to be a better supporter of students that identify as they. That is new to the system in so many ways, and we as the adults need to be proactive in being a voice instead of waiting for them to do that. So that's my space. That's learning for me. I wish I could say, right, but it has to be intentional, because it's not about me necessarily. It's about creating a space that's safe for that student. And so there are times when it's discomfort, because the last thing I want to do is offend someone. But I also have to understand too, in this level of leadership, that is sometimes the only way you're going to learn, because right, reading a book just won't do it. Right? You have to engage with people. You have to listen to students. You have to listen to parents. Right? And then you have to put things in place to make sure the students are safe, and have that opportunity to become global citizens. And so that's the learning. That's the work. Police. You gotta unmute to speak your truth.
The computer was playing games with me for a second. Yes, speaking your truth. It's being honest of your thoughts and feelings and opinions. Say them in a way that is true for you. We believe that speaking your truth is extremely imperative, and coming from a place of reflection and a place of speaking your inner truth, and recognize that we all hold a piece of the truth, right? So when we speak our truth, we're speaking it from our lens, our view, but also recognizing that might feel different to someone else, and really to ground yourself in that, and reflect, like, is this my truth, or how am I using my truth? Because sometimes we tend to weaponize and unintentionally. So being able to kind of be grounded in your truth, and recognizing that your truth might be is partial, because someone else's truth is also partial. And together we all might hold the truth together, but it's recognizing where that looks like and feels like. So, and this sometimes is the hard one, because we're taught not to be vulnerable, and So this one's sometimes the hardest one to do. Our little ones in our life might be able to do it a little bit better than us as older we get, because it's harder to speak our truth and it's harder to be grounded in that.
Can I
Anything you'd like to
on that, or I guess give a reflection. I think it is important that we are able and we feel comfortable in this community or in this group that we can share what's truthful and honest. So I would just love to hear your experience. Oftentimes I've heard people say, well, I'm going to speak my truth. And then they say what they're going to say, but it's really a disrespectful tone rather than I'm being honest with you and I'm being vulnerable with you. And so I'm curious, is that just my own personal experience, or is that something, is there a way to help kind of facilitate and manage those type of things? Or is that part of speaking the truth and I just am not familiar really with what it actually means?
So
No,
we just talked about this the other day.
we talk about how your truth should be grounded in your truth versus weaponizing and asking. We ask that people, it's a self-reflection of like, am I saying this because it's my truth, or I'm saying this because it's my reaction, and am I weaponizing that? And so when there's a vulnerability about that, so it's being able to reflect, like, is this really, and this is internal work, right? Not just like you're hoping each other or holding each other accountable to these agreements, but also thinking, is that really a reflection piece of truth, or is that a harm? Like, speak your truth. We like, this is my truth, yet I'm weaponizing. That might not still, it might be your truth, but we need to look at the intent impact that has. So it's all of these working together, but recognizing that speaking your truth is a reflection piece. Do you want to add more to that, Brad?
Yeah, I can give a real example that happened to me. It was in Tacoma when actually Creston was still my supervisor at that time. I was at First Creek, and we had some very well-intended, good folks that had a different belief in regards to it was at the time, I think it was like gay marriage, or and they created a space where they wanted to come and support parents going to a different place and sign up for that. And, I had to have a conversation with some religious leaders about that in a respectful way. That's their truth. And I'm not saying all, but that was their truth. And that was extremely uncomfortable for me because they are elders. But I had to say, hey, look, this is a school. And the reality is, not only do I have students that don't identify with, I also have students that have two parents that are the same gender. There's no way, right? There's just no space for that at a school. And so that's the reality of the world we live in. And then, we can go through the data and see the amount of harm that students that struggle with identity, sexual identity, in terms of calling self-harm to themselves, and it's not worth it. So we can, this is not easy work, and no one wants to be on the other side of that, and no one wants to see another parent hurt because the child is hurting or they lost the child, right? But those are things that push me into those conversations where I put myself aside, right?
So Rhonda, I think for me, when I do say speak for truth, I can really relate to that when you said, some of them are just like, it's almost like a weaponized kind of a conversation. And I just realized this when I was watching, I don't know if you guys have seen Ted Lasso series. There's a comment in there about be curious and not judgmental. So when I am receiving, as a recipient of that, speak the truth, I need to kind of step back and not take it personal, and just say, they're being vulnerable, and I'm going to just embrace that, even though it's hard to take what they're saying, because it's not about me, it's about speaking their truth. So I have to kind of just step out of that box or in that situation and just accept the fact that that's how they feel, and that they're just speaking their truth. I think Just how I approach it.
Anyone
I'm getting ready to give you another mask, you poor thing. You keep losing it. You have mask slippage.
You can use one of my, the one that,
I have one of them that go all the way up here, but it's hard.
Do you need another one? Do you need
No,
one?
I just
Okay.
keep adjusting here.
I know, I just feel bad. We can give you one of these. These
No,
are hard.
Yeah.
you're making that's a fashion statement. I don't know if I'm ready for that.
Well, I would agree. I think that I have listened to people speaking their truth, and even this week I spoke my truth, and I didn't speak it well. I was really not, I was in the moment, and I was passionate, and I just, and I did say my truth, but the way I said it probably wasn't the best.
but it's coming from your heart.
But it absolutely was coming from my
Yeah.
heart. And maybe that's what we see, when people are really impassioned about something. Sometimes it doesn't come out the way that they had anticipated, but at least you're seeing that they care and that they're passionate. And I hope that we embrace that for children as well as grown-ups, and that we give grace.
Well, one of the rules, I forgot who shared this with me. And speaking your truth, there is the caveat too of speak to be listened to. Don't speak to be heard, but speak to be listened to. Like whenever you speak your truth, the goal is to cause, and it's not even trying to convince someone of something, but it's giving them something to think about. Even if they don't believe the same way, at least they don't, right? And then we can come up with worst case scenarios, right? And let's say we have a very religious person here and one of my gay, even if they don't necessarily, there's a way in which they can speak to each other that is truthful, that is not harmful. If that makes sense, right? And that's again, it goes back, that's the culture, right? That's the culture we want to create, right? So just having that level of, and you cannot, it is impossible to do this work and not have all of this passes through the emotional part of your brain, right? And that's research based. So say, hey, I don't care either way. Yeah, we do care, that, right? We can pull it back and set it somewhere, but there is a level of care, right? And we get to temper that a little bit. But it's just like owning it and like, okay, I really want this person to, like, I care enough, I really want this person to, right? And is it you, police? Yes. Intent, impact? Or no, accept let's say, okay, expect and accept non-closure. We're talking about human beings. We're not going to figure this thing out. I'm a sociologist too at heart, and I love the Rorschach test because personality test. You can take it 2 weeks apart and you come up with 2 different personalities, right? And I have a 12-year-old at home, and I can tell you, if she took it anyway, but I'm just saying that understanding that just like anything else, it changes, and I think right now is the foundation, meaning that the stance is just like with doctors, they have that stance of do no harm, like, right? And so our stance is, and I think I love the part you talk about staying curious, and then just creating a culture, right? And then practice listening and speaking your truth. And I think that culture, there's where we make things better and safer for kids, right? 7 generations. I love that.
And this is usually where I remind you all, like this training workshop and our time together is not going to be the fix of all things around oppression or systemic anything. It's the start of it's a conversation, and that honestly, if I had a magic wand to end all of the isms that are out there, I would have used it a long time ago. So it's the acknowledgement that expect and accept non-closure. Like you're not going to go home probably feeling completely whole or have something that is like, oh yeah, here we're going to have this big thing and it's going to be done. And, like we want to have everything packaged really nice in a pretty bow and it's beautiful. And that's not how this work is. It is not linear either. Like there's so many things happening at the same time. It's not a quick fix, and it's not a check off list. And so it's messy. And a lot of times we don't like messy. We like to make it look really great. So this work is not, it's a lot, and it's not a destination point. It's a journey. So when people are like, "Oh, we have arrived, we eradicated, sexism, homophobia and racism," there, that's there's a lot there. So it's being able to recognize that there's a lot in this work. There's a moment of acceptance that it's not going to be. There's going to be a long road. And the next one is intention and impact. And this is really hand in hand with your speaker truth, where, okay, this might have been my intention to speak my truth, but I saw the impact and that it harmed others. What does that mean? And going deeper versus just going, that wasn't my intention. But let's talk about the impact and how can we go deeper in these conversations, and kind of navigate that. Sometimes it's a mistake. We all learn from mistakes. That's one thing that I think as we tend to become in spaces of leadership and spaces that we don't want to look like we're making mistakes, but we know that in mistake making, that's when we learn the best. And that's when we can really dive deeper into those conversations. In fact, a lot of the intent and impact conversations I've had actually grown more thoughtful relationships that are more authentic, because we were able to hold each other's intent and impact and really get deeper into that and understanding each other, and honoring each other's truth. So that's, I think, intention, impact, and speaker truth are so interconnected, because it's really important to have that conversation if there's impact. Would you like to say anything, Brad, about that?
No, I'm interesting because I'm sure that there are often opportunities for you all to exercise the intent and impact muscle, or you receive messages that may have intent and impact. And so, again, we talk about culture, right? So how's that modeled and message? What does that look like, sound like for you all, especially as we're going down this? Well, you've gotten information that have put you kind of leaning in this direction, and you yourself all have to figure out, this road. So how does that intent and impact play into that for some of you?
So usually we do a parent share. So I don't know how well this is going to work with distancing. So let's try it. And if it's too difficult, then we can just popcorn out. And the question is, which one feels really like you got it? Like, I know how to do this really well. And which one is it like harder to lean in on? Like, ooh, like for me, I can speak my truth, but it's the hardest one. And I've been doing this work for a long time, is like accept and expect non-closure. Cause I'm like, like, why are we not there yet? And reminding myself. So if you'd like to share with your table partner, your next to a table partner, let's see how this works. And if it's too much, then we can just popcorn out. It looks like. Do you want to try that out?
It might be easier just to popcorn out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Popcorn out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anybody would like to share?
Yeah, I'll just start. I feel really good about speaking my truth, because I do that with people every single day at work. I mean, I talk about the most personal, life-changing, horrible, and wonderful things. And, over decades of doing that, I don't know, I'm able to view most things through an extremely clinical eye, and I feel like I'm really good at getting the truth people need to hear out there. And which also makes me very good at expecting and accepting non-closure as well, because that is often the result of those kind of hard conversations too. So that's my good side.
Are you doing both? The one that's hard for you?
Oh, okay, yeah, I'll do what's hard for me too.
My question, that's a question. It's not a, like,
Yeah.
are we supposed to tell which one's hard for us and then go back and do that other, or do you want us to give both answers as we're speaking? Brad, what do you think?
Whatever you feel the most comfortable with. But yeah, if you'd like to share both, that would be awesome.
Yeah, just go with it. Let's go loose.
All right.
It is hard for me to stay engaged sometimes. I'll say that a lot of times. I would just love everybody to hear my truth and accept my truth. And, you know, it doesn't always happen that way. And I can start to tune myself out a little bit when you're not hearing my truth. That's whatever.
We hear you.
Thanks.
We may not listen.
I can accept that.
I think for me, for most of my life, speaking my truth was very, very, very difficult, and it wasn't the culture I grew up in. It was not acceptable, and so I got used to not speaking my truth, and I have recognized that there are some benefits to age, and I'm not nearly as intimidated by whatever people think of me, and I'm finding that it's easier. Because I think, you know, by nature, I'm kind and I speak truth because I think it's important and I not to offend. And I think that it's become easier for me.
And what's your trial? Which one is harder for you? Which of those is the hardest for you?
Do what?
Which one do you find most challenging?
I think probably accepting non-closure. I think is probably the most challenging for me because I like results and I like to see people do better, and I like to see them expand their horizons, and sometimes people don't choose to do that. So that's probably the most difficult for me.
Okay. I'd say that it's no surprise that the one that I am best at is speaking my truth.
We would agree.
And it's been ingrained through military. My father was a minister and always spoke very directly. And then now in medicine, in the clinical point of view, it's, there's one thing that I can say. But, I've also realized that probably my greatest shortfall with that has become intent and impact, and having, adverse impacts with certain things when you're speaking your truth, which also would lead me back to become very practiced experiencing discomfort. But no, I just think that, speaking your truth at times, that it's something that should be very, calculated to make sure that your intent is the same as the impact. So you're getting across what you're trying to. And that's something that I've had to work on.
I think I'm reversed. I have a hard time speaking the truth. And I'm good at experience discomfort because of the experiences that I've had and continue to experience as a person of color. But I have a hard time speaking my truth, believe it or not, Jeff.
It is hard to believe.
Only because I feel that because of in our culture, I don't want to offend or hurt anyone. So there's that intent and impact. And most of the time, I just keep it to myself until my internal is full, and then it becomes external, and then that's where that's where my discomfort kicks in, where I am comfortable being in a discomfort zone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Everyone stare down. I'll go next. I think I struggle most with speaking my truth for the same reasons as you. I never want to offend anyone. I would rather be silent than take the risk of somebody misinterpreting my intent and having a poor impact. And my weakness is understanding people's intent and their impact, because I do feel like majority of the time when people are speaking their truth, that they are weaponizing. I take that as weaponizing because I really have zero intent of ever offending. I feel like I'm a very collegial person. And when the experiences I've had when somebody says, let me speak my truth, they're angry and I feel like they're really coming at me. So I would say my biggest issue is intent and impact, like discerning that and really being thoughtful. You're mindful about them.
This is an interesting, I'm trying to put myself in my professional versus my personal, right? So in your job, and so as your superintendent, I would say it's very easy for me to speak my truth when it's, and sometimes I don't speak my entire truth because of my role, right? And so those hats are interesting, I think. But I think anyone that knows me, I usually say it like it is, even really uncomfortable things. So I am fine with experiencing discomfort. Intention and impact, I think that I hate non-disclosure. I mean, I hate not having an end. So but I've accepted that this is messy. But intention still, many times when I put out something or say something, I'm still surprised at how someone takes it. I'm getting better, I think, at anticipating that, but I'm still surprised, even as old as I am. So at 5 o'clock, and I just say this, I know we're streaming, but at 5 o'clock, we'll be putting out something that will probably have an impact on families that we will be having our K-1-2. I verified it with Dr. Chen. We will be reopening our hybrid on the 16th of November. Okay, so that's going out at 5. So we all might have some impact while we're sitting here. Still looking at Facebook. But that constant tension, I think, is, and how to do that well.
Yeah. That was me.
I have learned and grown and embraced experiencing discomfort. And that's part of, I guess, my age, because I embrace that because I've learned so much through discomfort. When I surrounded myself and created safe spaces all the time, I don't feel like I learned and grew very much. So as a result of that, I have a hard time, I'm going to be real vulnerable here, speaking my truth, because sometimes my truth changes and I'm not really connected with what is my truth at times, because it fluctuates, if that makes any sense. And so that's a struggle for me to speak my truth when I'm still trying to figure it out at this age.
I don't think there's anything unusual about that, though. I mean, the world is constantly changing around us, and I don't.
Is that what we aspire to? That we want to grow until we die? I mean, really, don't we want to learn?
Yeah.
Yeah, grow.
If your truth never
be
changed,
curious and change.
you're probably not a good listener.
Right, so when I speak my truth, it could be different next week.
Well,
Because you didn't forget. Like
yeah.
So when your husband says, "Do you love me?" and you say yes this week, and then no next week.
No, that actually. Sometimes
I was gonna say, that's not funny. I get in trouble a lot.
I love you always. I don't know if I like you.
That's
say it's growing your truth. So instead of like, we're all evolving in our truth. And that's part of that. The more information we get and more information we're growing and we're kind of living in our truth differently. So it's an evolution of truth for your truth. And that's going to be true for all of us. I love that you brought that in. Is there any others that would like to share?
I think that's everybody.
Got everybody. Brad, would you like to share?
I guess, oh man. I think easier is, for the most part, I'm engaged. I really listen, I was taught earlier, don't listen to just what people say, but listen to what they don't say. And so I listen intently, sometimes overly, too much. And I'm always interested and curious about word choice, which causes me sometimes to overanalyze things, but also, I think also too, there also lies truth within that as well, because, you know, if we're leading with love and love of kids, and being in this, not just profession, but just being who I am in the world, I feel like I'm constantly having to discern who is here to accept me for who I am and who's here trying to cause harm. Right? And so that is my world, and that's how I have to be. So I'm very intuitive in that way. And so my struggle is knowing what that feels like, the hurt, the harm, whether it's intent, whatever the impact is different, is I don't want people to feel or have some of the experience that I had. So I struggle with discomfort in the world of race, etc. They had this thing that was called, I forget what it was, but anyway, I ended up being a rescuer. And a rescuer is someone that, you know, oh no, it's okay. Well, it's not okay, right? And it's not to cause harm, but it's like, I need you to unpack what you said, and I don't need you to write it off and say that, oh, he or she is being sensitive. Right? I need you to own it. And so that's the part where I struggle, and I go in and I rescue and I try to fix, as opposed to letting those things, you know, take its course. And that's how we learn and get stronger and better, but not to the point where it's detrimental, if that makes sense. So and then at the bottom it says glean, sing, and curious. And so this was very helpful. We work with a couple of the districts, and for whatever reason, I mean, it's in the book, and we started playing with it, but they absolutely loved it. One, I think it's because they're educators, a lot of them in the room. But click to the compass, I'm sorry, please.
Is it the thinking and the?
So, well, yeah, it helps. And so it's called the, you know, race compass. It can be equity compass. It's all about how you enter. So for instance, let's say we're talking about sexism, right? How do we enter into that, or how everyone enters in that is going to be different. Whether it's sexism, racism, it can be religion, it can be whatever it is. But to some degree, we're going to enter into a space. We're going to enter into, and so usually when we talk about race, and this is research-based, usually where non-people of color enter is here, is in the thinking. Why do you think that is? Why does that make?
You're saying not people, non-colored,
So usually,
non-people of color.
yes, usually white people usually enter through thinking and intellect. Why do you think that is?
Because we don't have any experience.
From experience.
Yeah, so it makes perfect sense. And that's totally fine,
Yeah.
right? But the goal is, as we enter in there, we're trying to like, okay, make sense of this, right? Like, wait a minute, like, wow, the experience, what does that mean? He sits down, she takes her purse, moves her purse, like, what? he gets in the elevator, she hops off, and all of those experiences for, right? Or a kid in the classroom that doesn't get called on for whatever, like, those are real experiences that happen for children. So as we try to make sense of those, we're entering in the thinking space, or even some of the policies we have in place. And we see a disparate group, right? And so this is me in my learning, so I'm gonna be vulnerable. So at one of my schools, I had a target policy, and I do tend to what America tends to do is like, if something's not working, what do? I double down on consequences. That's what we do. So it's like, all right, you're not in class by such and such a time, right? You get stay after class, you get a lunch detention, and then it goes to after school, then Saturday, right? I keep ratcheting up these things as opposed to the group of, it was predominantly a group of young ladies, and they spent a lot of time in the bathroom, whatever, getting ready. Long story short, when I went and I actually sat down and engaged with them and found out what was going on, a lot of them had to be the ones that take care of their younger siblings prior to getting there. Mm-hmm. And so they had to take on these multiple roles. So they're rushing to get to school, and they're not even together themselves. And they were already feeling the feel of being poor, right? So my school, the one I was at, was 94% free and reduced lunch. Mm-hmm. And so being in a space and wanting to be accepted meant so much to them that they were willing to miss breakfast because they wanted to go to the bathroom and get dressed. Mm-hmm. And so what did I do? Well, I opened the cafeteria up earlier. So the kids that were there got to eat and get out of the place. When they came rushing in, they had time to eat, rather than continually trying to strain. But you see what I'm saying? And that's me. Part of the system. Thinking that intent, impact. I cause more harm, more drama, etc. But anyway, thinking about how do we enter into this intellectual piece, and it's not that we stay there. Yes, it's not that we stay there. The goal of this is saying, notice I use the word intentionally, but I say enter, right? I didn't say we start, I say enter. So we go into the intellectual, and then we get into wherever else we would like to go. And these are put in place intentionally, because when you start thinking about something, you can easily begin to start believing it, right? And then there's the feeling, and then you can go into the doing, or back, right? Or you thinking and say, let me try this, and then start feeling, then you start, but regardless of how you enter it, I just want you to hold that. So when we get into some of these deeper things that you haven't experienced, like I haven't experienced, right? I'm straight, there's some things I haven't experienced. So I have to enter into this area, right? And I have to be curious, and I have to listen, and I have to be uncomfortable. And that's where you have to stay, right? And so this is a good thing here. So whenever you get into a stuck space, or you start to hear new things, whether it's about your students, about your data, it is 100% okay to enter in, whether it's race, sexism, and lesbianism, to enter in here if you haven't had that experience. But then let's work around the room. Let's work around the room. What does this look like? What does this feel like? And that's where we start begin to engage. And so we can better understand, so create that space. Police, I got just a small banner in the back that said, just kidding. They're going to take a quick break. How long?
Yeah, actually, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say restroom, get food, those kinds of things.
Yeah, actually, this is where I was going to put a break in anyway, so it's perfect. So what do you want? And I know there's food, so 10, 15-minute break. What would you like?
So I'm going to put a pin in this, so when we come back, I just want to get your thoughts on that. Just want to make sure we get going. Go ahead.
Can we take a 15?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's great. Thank you.
We're gonna take a break, but then we said, oh, bye. We're just sitting here.
Is this still running?
Live streaming.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are we ready to jump back in, or where are we at?
All set.
Oh, perfect. So, Brad, did you want to say anything, or do you want me to move forward with the other slides?
I think we can move forward to the slides. I just want to remind them again in terms of the probable way in which you're more likely to process. And so without trying to steer it, just kind of letting that flow in terms of trying to enter intellectually, look at the data, gather, analyze, etc. Yeah.
Can I ask, I can't read, it says feeling, is that behavioral, above feeling in that left quadrant, bottom left quadrant? What is the word that's kind of in the chart?
It's behavioral,
Behavioral,
and then moral,
Moral.
and then
intellectual,
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
and
intellectual,
social.
and then
Okay.
social.
yeah,
The
my
doing.
apologies.
Yep, okay, no, I'm trying to write it down so I can remember.
And what I'll do is at the end of this, I will send out the PowerPoints and videos, because we'll probably skip through some of the videos. So I'll still send them out to you all so you can view them on your own.
Excellent, thank you.
Perfect.
Of course.
We're good. Oh, I can't see it.
I'll mimic it for you, there you go. Brad says this.
Go ahead, please.
All right. So the next portion is like a lot of content. So bear with me. Please eat and ask questions. But this is more about kind of defining terms. So when we talk about certain things, what we talk about. So we know what each other are talking about, having common language. And this is really about, this first slide is just the common language between the difference between equity versus equality. And when we talk about the difference between the two, they're very different, and a lot of people use them interchangeably, but they're not. And also when we talk about equity, we're really talking about removing systemic barriers of what that looks like. So, has anybody seen this slide before, or had conversations about the difference between equality and equity?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, you can- Yeah.
And so when we really talk about equity, it's like removing systemic barriers like the fence. So sometimes we focus too much on the boxes and the students' boxes. Is like we're actually not asking ourselves what is this policy really for? Like is it unintentionally become a fence? Same thing with like a huge one that came up recently was the digital equity. Sometimes where we build more fences than we do take them down. And how do we kind of navigate that? So it's removing systemic barriers. I'll tell you one that our agency had unintentionally done was telecommute status. We unintentionally built a fence without thinking that it was actually harming our employees, and thinking differently about what professionalism looks like, thinking differently about what our workday looks like, thinking differently about how our policies unintentionally became a place of harm versus a place of freedom and justice. Would you like to say anything about this, Brad, this slide, or want to keep going? Are you eating?
No. I'm monitoring my talk time. I'm trying to channel down.
No worries. All right, so I'll keep moving. So here's some other language we like to talk about. And this is about the levels of oppression, really defining what that means. And that could be, when I say levels of oppression, I mean systemic. So, I mean, well, that's the definition, but I'm talking about like, we use different terms like individual oppression, like racism, sexism, all of those isms. We kind of blanket all terms, and that's not how that works and how it's seen and felt. Individual really looks at prejudice, bias, discrimination. It's really what we feel. And a lot of times what we can point out and see. And, it's lots of terms and lots of actions and behaviors. That one's really, a lot of times we can point to, like, oh, that is an act of. The institutional oppression is a lot of times unintentional. It's in like policies and practices and procedures that unintentionally benefit dominant culture unintentionally. For example, our education system was built a long time ago. Well, who had access to education when it was first engaged, right? Does anybody remember who had anybody shout out who had access to education in the early 1900s?
White male, rich white males.
Yeah, and it's not that it was somebody going ha ha ha. It was what our policies were at the time, who had access, who didn't have access. And so sometimes we might not realize that some of those policies are still enacted and unintentionally harm some of our kids with no one's going ha ha ha, but it's unintentional. It's just the way we do things and not recognizing that that might be an institutional barrier that is created. And structural, aka systemic oppression, is a history and current reality of institutional isms across all institutions. Like our education system is built on systemic oppression that negatively impacts communities of non-dominant identities. And so when we talk about systemic oppression, it is something that's living and breathing water. It's not any one person trying to create dominance, like I am the most powerful one, but it's really about thinking about all these intertwined. And systemic is usually the hardest one to kind of think about and look at because it's not a policy that you can rewrite. It's kind of like living in the kind of in the way of the water. And it's hard to kind of like, oh, is that it? Is that it? And so here's some really great examples of what that looks like. So individual is really about like slurs, the smaller, round in here. The next one is local community and our institutions. Now, some of these examples are current local norms with unintentionally like where people are living. That could be, where were they set up to live? And then the next part is the systemic, where, where do buses go, the impact on environment, chronic poverty, access to wealth, policing the criminal justice system, differences in educational outputs. We know, unfortunately, the schools are funded based on our funding model. And so sometimes it's just set up that way, right? And we don't unintentionally think about the harm that it's doing to our kids and our teachers and you all, as educators, on how we can provide information to our kids, and who has access and who doesn't. And these are things that it is not one person's fault. It's not intentional in a thing. So this is where I'm going to use intention impact. It's not the intention, but we don't always sit down and look at the impact that it has on oppression. And we don't even know to call it oppression. Sometimes we go, oh, that was not meant for that to happen, but that is a possible level of impact and oppression that occurs. So these are things that kind of all hold in. And the bottom line is some of these have just been built on historical context that are still having ripple effects on our history. And it's like living and breathing, it's in our system. And sometimes we just don't know what to do with it because it's a lot, right? So when we talk about students that are identified as transgender or non-conforming, and we start thinking about, oh my gosh, like our buildings were not set up to have gender neutral restrooms. And how do we have these conversations that are really tough about what that looks like? And we can't just take down a building and build it back up. I know that would be great, but it's kind of thinking about how that systemically is in place and what do we do about that? How do we have these tough conversations around that? Because no one's like, no one can identify that way and attend our schools. So it's kind of being able to kind of talk about the systemic portion and recognizing that it's still an impact on our kids, our communities, our education systems. Any questions around any of that? The definitions?
No, but I want to give context, if I could,
Yeah.
to them, and in terms of, from your position, something to think about. What does it look like when you look at your policy window for AP classes, advanced classes? What does it look like for Run and Start? We had one that, there was one around half-day kindergarten. Why might some of these things may need a revisit of those I named? What could be the disparate impact?
I can speak to Run and Start in my opinion.
Yeah.
I feel like it is a phenomenal benefit to students who will not have the opportunity to afford college in the future. One of the downsides of being a rural community is that access is an issue for our students. And I also believe that, I don't believe that our district's done a great job of supporting and encouraging and giving kids the pathway that they need to put everything in steps so that they can take advantage of that. I think parents who have that knowledge are really good at doing that for their kids, but I don't know that we are. And we have an acceleration policy that's supposed to help aid with that. So so I do have an issue around that. I think that is something that is a barrier, and that transportation piece is a barrier for students in certain populations, and I would love to see that overcome.
And I just want to make it clear, it's not like no one's trying to harm the students, right? And yeah.
We were in a place at a district that had, it was a kind of like, for lack of a better word, first come, first served basis to certain classes. And students had to go and show up at the high school. That was the policy. What's the plus and minus of the policy?
Gotta get there.
Right. And so that's the reason for this type of, right? It's not looking to demonize. It's saying, how do we get to a better place to where, right, there's more opportunities, and access. We work with districts all the time that have, and I work, well, I'll back it up. I won't put them on Front Street. So I had a situation as a parent where I had a child that qualified for a class, but she wasn't put in because there was a quote unquote cap on the class. And it was an honors class. And I experienced some discomfort. And I didn't want to rebel because, of course, I know these people, my community, etc. Anyway, long story short, that was one of those things that it felt individual, but I thought about too. Then the council shared that there were other students on the waiting list, and it'd be different if he wasn't talking to a principal that kind of knew a little bit about master schedule. So those are small things that happen. And again, from this standpoint, thinking about that. So I have it, and my daughter's a little brown girl, right? And knowing too what that could mean for her in terms of her cohort, et cetera. Thinking about your school district in terms of what does that look like through a lens of equity, so that we don't keep, like Felicia was saying, we don't hold things in place because it's been done that way traditionally. Does that make sense? Long before anybody probably in the room has gotten here. But it may cause some re-examination. And that's where, the equity policy could come in place, right? And we've seen policies out too in, I guess we call it Central Washington, where it causes harm to those students that are farmers. Like they have to, right? And so now, like, what does that look like? And it's not to, it's like thinking about ways that they can still take care of family business and still have these academic opportunities. So why do we have to shelve it right here for 2 hours right after school, as opposed to let them go home and do their family business with the farm and then come back at it? You see what I'm saying? It's like create opportunities as opposed to creating barriers. Am I making sense? So as you start thinking about policies and start thinking about equity, what are ways you create more opportunities? If that makes sense. Or better yet, take down some barriers, either way.
Well, I was just saying, when she brought up AP, it's a big, huge systemic thing to me that AP, the words, for kids that are disenfranchised or don't have a lot of self-confidence or a lot of support, just the word AP would have them not to even attempt to take the test. Even though here in the district, we've taken the fee out, right? So we've got some policy that supports them. But if you're really, just the mere mention of the word AP could be a barrier for some kids to even attempt it, right?
Yeah.
That's a huge United States systemized barrier. I'm not worthy.
And a lot of our systemic barriers are from the federal unintended, right? Like that is where we live through the education system that's all interconnected. And that's the difficult part is sometimes it's not intentional, but it's, who designed some of the policies that are based on federal, and then on state that might not be aligned with how to support the kids that we're serving. And that and it might be like try to be an inclusive, like let's support all kids, but it still might be leaving out the ones that are most marginalized in our systems. All right.
Thank you, Felice. I just want to try to give context.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I'm going to go to the next slide. So when we talk about experience of privilege and oppression, I'm not, this is not talking about like, I think the word privilege has gotten to a place where it's like, oh, you have privilege, you don't. And that's not what this is about. It's really about the experience of the system to a person. And people might not always see it and feel it. And it's also extremely complicated. It is not a binary of you have it, you don't. There's very complicated, especially with intersectionalities. I also don't use the words minority or marginalized anymore because that talks about people being deficient versus looking at communities as whole people, no matter their identity. And what is the issue is not people. We're all complete, great, amazing people. It's our systems. So our systems have been unintentionally have some holes in it. And how do we think about our system is providing that, not individuals. So I like to say that we're systemically dominant groups and non-systemically dominant groups. Meaning if we looked at, lots of our education systems, who's present, who's in the leadership roles, so it's about the system, not about the individual. So here's some experiences that might often take place. Now, this is not, again, a binary. I know it looks like there's two different here, but it's very complicated. So like in this setting, I have a lot of systemic power here. We're all leaders, and that's a systemic power. And that's differently. So I might, be taught that I am the norm, less aware of social privilege and other groups' feelings and concerns and experience because it's not in my everyday, and the system hasn't done that for me, hasn't given me that knowledge or that experience. Maybe socially conscious, socially unaware, not in that sense. It's just I might not know another group's identifies what their norms are because I just haven't been exposed. It may show defenses of guilt, doubt, or rationalization rather than empathy or urgency towards marginalized folks' experience. And what this is really talking about, if you don't know, then you don't know how, you're not always in a place to provide empathy if you're just not in a place of having that experience. The opposite, other side of that conversation is where systemically non-dominant groups might experience. And again, it goes overlapping, right? This goes in and out. So it's not, I know I said it this way, but there's lots of back fluidity between the two. May have had history of dealing with negative societal messages, like what you're bringing, like who's part of AP and who isn't. You know, who's considered this and that, like smart. May feel hyper visible or invisible. May have to work to see out similar others. Only lonely. May socially be conscious or socially unaware. If you notice, they're in both groups. um, and may seek acknowledgement, empathy, and urgency for change rather than rationalization or guilt. And this is really about the urgency of change and like, why is it not happening now? And not recognize that it sometimes contributed to a person doing it versus it's a system. And a lot of times we don't talk about the system. We talk about who's the leader that keeps up the system versus, oh, it doesn't matter always about the leader. It's about the system that's in place. So a lot of times, as board members, we might have people say, why haven't you changed this yet? And it's okay. It's complicated, right? There's more than just making a change. There's a lot of things involved, like AP. People would say, well, make that change so it's accessible for all, but there's complications in that. So it's being able to navigate those spaces and understand that it's a systemic. Is any questions around this?
Yes.
Yes.
This is an opportunity to kind of come out of the self into next level. And the little push I would like right now, if you grab your pen and think about right now, in terms of a child, how may a child in Eatonville School District experience privilege and or experience oppression? The next line, how may a teacher in Eatonville School District experience privilege and oppression? And then lastly, but not least, how may a parent in Eatonville School District experience privilege and oppression? Please, you just want them to go around and share out one or all three examples?
Just one, maybe.
Okay. So you can pick your student or teacher, but how might they experience privilege or some level of oppression?
I was awful first with the student. privilege is legacy. And a lot of what I perceive as legacy families here in Eatonville. And so I see that as a privilege, and oppression would be financial insecurity for students, oppression.
I 100% agree with you just said. Bill, it is about, oftentimes about legacy, multi-generational being part of that group. And that does put you in a position of power, I feel. And the oppression comes from, I think, financial and lack of opportunity for mentorship, or really having somebody who knows how to work the system, for lack of a better way to say it.
So did you do parent or did you do
I'm a
student?
student, but that applies to parent as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to get as many perspectives. So
Absolutely. I
you're
have the
saying the
same
same
for
thing
both.
for parent?
Yeah.
Well, I think you can say for all, I mean, staff
Really?
as well, because you
That's
have
true, we have legacy staff
our
as well.
teachers,
that's
yeah.
true.
So I think I would agree with Rhonda and Diane. It's the social economic piece from the oppression piece, and then the legacy piece, definitely. It's a small community, so.
So may I build on that? Just, so I've been here 8 years, but I'm still an outsider, right? And I think that the outsider-insider is real. I mean, I have people say I've lived here 20 years and I'm still an outsider. But I just want to build on that. Many times parents, their history and they're prejudged when they walk in because of perhaps who they were or who they knew or whatever. And in a completely different school district, every parent would be on an equal basis and everybody would just be coming in. And I think making assumptions that if you were this kind of student, then you come in as a parent, I would really worry about those pieces, the layers. It's almost like classes.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, obviously, everybody that comes here from Bethel was a problem student who, got booted out for whatever reason, and clearly from less affluent families to live in that neighborhood, and yeah, I mean, we make up our minds about a lot of things.
I want a specific example for students in the beginning right now, and it's just access. Whether it's transportation access to the bus. I think it was Preston that said that, talking with transportation issues in school, like this, it's not something that Olympia thinks about a lot, where our students might have to stand for 30 minutes out in the snow with the possibility of cougar attack. That's just a reality of where we're at. But then internet connectivity issues, the ability at one of our facilities to even get online and have multiple students with access to internet, because the system can't actually give them all bandwidth. So there's a lot of things like that. There's access to learning.
That's another thing that hobbles all these groups too. I mean, the students can't learn, the teachers are hampered in their ability to teach, and now families are really powerless to help their students while we're stuck trying to do this at home. So another far-reaching barrier across all these groups.
No, I'm pretty much in the same line with them. I mean, I didn't grow up in, quote, Eatonville. I grew up the line, which definitely had a difference.
Yeah.
And it may still today, I don't know, but it did when my kids were.
How long did you ride the bus each way? I mean, even today, kids from up there spend over an hour each way.
I spent, and my kids spent probably 4,500 each way.
Yeah.
But the kids further up, over an hour each way.
So I have a question for you all. And you all have something there, and we all know too, right? So as we lead into this conference, I noticed that people put legacy, and legacy could be anything, but when I walk into this room, I don't necessarily know who and whose legacy. I know who is white, who's black, who's different colors, right? And I also know, and as I listen, I know who can speak English, who can't speak English, pretty much, right? So I'm sharing this so that you're in a position of policy. And your mission statement that we're committed to is still kids. So it's like, as we begin to have these conversations, we want to do our best effort in terms of centering the margins. So thinking about the non-legacy kid that is Latinx, that's poor, and can't speak English. That is not his or her whatever. Oh, and let's just say that he or she may be gay or maybe not. So I'm saying those are the students that we're going to have to advocate for, because you better believe they're going to be fighting their entire life. So that is why we're having this conversation. That is why this conversation has to have this feel of not my child. Because if you can't feel that not my child, right, then we have to get to that point, because you're writing for all children. You said when you said down, not just think about all children. All children. And we have to think about all children.
And so, Brad, I want to add, when we talk about all children, it's also the children that might not be represented in your district that may be coming to your district. So if you have a district that might not have, children of color, your policy should, the seventh generation thinking, it should include, how would that harm kids of color? Because that's the seventh generation thinking. And so it's not just building for who's currently in your district, but who are you building to provide for your district in the future?
I got a question for you. That for those of you that made children, did everybody marry pretty much who their parents wanted them to marry?
No.
Yeah. What I'm saying is, I mean, if we truly love our children, the love comes through love of other children. So we're always ready. We're always ready. And that's a practice. That's a practice. Because they're going to be a child coming to you that you didn't necessarily know was coming, but that's going to be your child.
One thing that one of the Zoom meetings I was on with you just really struck me, and it's been really powerful for me. Somebody talked about that the teachers should love every child. And I don't know that teachers, I think that's just so powerful, because, I've caught myself saying, well, it's hard for parents when they realize that teachers don't love your kids like you do. But there was an impassioned person, and I think you probably remember that meeting, said, no, every teacher should love every child. And it just moved me to tears, because that is so powerful. And you talk about the love, and you gotta love them all. And some kids don't get that love from their teachers, and I think that's huge. It's a different way of thinking. We need to love each and every one of them.
Well, all means all.
Right.
It doesn't mean some, or the ones that we like the best.
Right.
And when you love children, you do anything for them to be successful. It's really as simple as that.
And that's the beautiful thing about what police was sharing is we have to get comfortable being in those uncomfortable spaces and continue to speak for those children, because there are some children, and it doesn't mean, right, we're getting into this thing, and it doesn't mean that there's less care. It means that the student that's coming in limping may need some extra attention, right? And limping doesn't mean that kid has done anything wrong. Limping could be they weren't born here, right? The legacy piece. The limping could be they don't speak English. That's not their fault, right? And that looks like anything too. We even had to unpack that, because we were in a district, and the first thing the mentality went to was Latinx kids. But when we went through, I sitting right across, and the young lady would be no different than you, but she didn't speak English. She's from Ukraine, right? So now we start associating color. Like, see how we train ourselves to think certain ways? But again, English doesn't have a color to it. Non-English doesn't have a color to it, right? And so it has to really just think about that impact and really be intentional, because you never know. You just never know, right? But, go ahead, please. All right, thank you.
I love that you're talking because this is like really a bridge to the next portion of this, and I'm skipping videos, but this is really a talking about the social identities. Um, there's so many. These are like the 10 that we talk about, but these are we call them the 10 dimensions of social identity. Um, and these are the ones that we kind of frame in systems and who benefits unintentionally from our systems that are in place. And so it's age, race, ethnicity, citizenship, and national origin, faith-based perspective and religion, sex and gender, disability, sexual orientation, class, social economic status, and education and intellect. And I would even say leadership positionality within that the education system, because it's even broke down more. And who's seen as systemic? What does systemic look like? And who has unintentional benefits? For an example, 25, when we reach 25, people don't have to put their information, their parental information on FAFSA anymore. That's a systemic barrier for some of their recent graduates that doesn't have parents that might be there to support them financially, or they might not be in a space to do that, but federal government, based on their FAFSA, they can. And so these are things that we don't break down and think about because it's this systemic, right? And so and this is complicated. We have these identities that are very personal to us, and then how do they play out only personally, but also how does that play out systemically? So it's very complex, and we're complex human beings. So this is not about like I have all the privilege or I don't, because it's all about situational too, and what system we're in. But it's super complex, and we don't ever talk about that complexity. We talk about like we choose one and we stick there versus going, oh, I have privilege in a lot of ways, and yet sometimes I don't, and it systemically and non-systemically. So it's and how it plays out as an individual to me and how I feel it. So, for example, with disability, I did not really understand the what privilege I had with this within the context of disability until my stepfather got in a car accident. And thinking about, I don't have to think about, where I'm going. I know that I'm going to have a seat available if I go to the movies, and I don't have to think about that. That's an unintentional privilege of our systems, and I don't have to think about if there's going to be a ramp if I'm in a chair, or I don't have to think about, if there's going to be, if I have an unseen disability, I don't have to, there's a lot of things I don't have to think about. So that's systemically set up. It does not mean that there's no bad or good about it. It's just that we don't recognize that systems are set up to benefit. Does anybody have any like any examples that in the schools or in their personal life that they can see unintentional systemic privilege that happens, or in their life? I can give you a big one. Calendar. Our calendar set up based on Christian holidays. And so even from our breaks to how we even develop our calendar, our educational calendars. And sometimes we might not recognize that our little ones that celebrate Ramadan, that, especially when they're up in high school age, they start, partaking into the religion, that they don't eat until sundown. And if that's in summer, in the Pacific Northwest, our summers are really long, or like our spring and summer gets pretty long. So we're not aware that, our school schedule does not always fit their needs in prayer or in celebration of their holidays. And that's unintentional. Like, it's not like our school districts are going, ha, ha, ha. It's very unintentional. And yet it's a systemic thing that we just don't think about.
I think I'll share, I feel like I have a lot of privilege, and we don't, it's the water that we swim in.
Mhm.
And now there's that dissonance of, oh, I didn't realize that. So I'll just give kind of a silly example. When my husband and I hike, he's always like, well, I think I'm going to go hike by myself. And I'm like, oh, as a woman, I'm not going to hike by myself, right? So I am very aware of my surroundings. So when we see a single woman hiking, I always feel really uncomfortable for her, right? But she's by herself. And yet, and so we have that conversation. But when I find myself in that situation, when I'm like, oh, I didn't even think of that, I want to remember those moments, because that is really very important in a system, to remember all of the pieces that we just take for granted. And I don't even see my privilege, but I know I have it.
Yeah, and the thing about privilege is not about it being good or bad. Like, if we all have money and we feel bad that we have money, right? Because we have class privilege, you're not going to give your money away, right? Like, if you want to, you can give it to me, and I will take you off the guilt of having that privilege. But it's about what you do with it, right? And thinking about it systemically. And so that, I think that's where the conversation about levels of what's happening, it's complicated, but it's not about good or bad, or if you have this privilege you're automatically good or bad with it. It's about what we do with that. It's like, thinking about, oh, what do I do with it? So maybe with that woman, it's like checking in, hey, are you good? um and also just recognizing that, like, okay, I'm going to support that person in doing that, whatever that might look like. Any other examples? I know y'all gave some examples already with Running Start. That's ageism. So we didn't even realize that is like we're trying to expand for our kids to have access to college at an earlier age. But yet we still kind of think, oh, are they can't do certain things as other college students. So the Running Start becomes about their age. I'm a professor. I still teach at in a community college, and they're treated differently. As soon as they're told they're a Running Start students, they're treated differently in the class. And they're treated like, oh, you won't know how to do this. And I'll tell you, the Running Start students are usually much more advanced in a lot of things than we give them credit for. They experience ageism differently in that setting. All right, so I'm going to go to the next portion.
Rhonda has something for you.
Yes.
Okay, I'm looking at the last one, education. And I think that's one of the deficits I really feel, because I don't have a higher ed degree, and yet I'm passionate about education. So passionate that all of my children have higher education degrees. And so I think that is something in this education world, that this swimming pool that we swim in, that I think sometimes people look down on people thinking they don't have the ability. Sometimes it's not the ability. It's a lack of opportunity, right? So I think that is real. It's real in our community as well as in this industry. I don't know what you call it. This the microcosm of education.
So so does that play out too in new families or quote unquote like city folk versus students that are more in the agricultural world? How does that play out is there a line within that?
Up the line in town kids?
Yeah. What does that mean?
Up the line.
So that towards the mountain, when we say up the line, we mean the smaller towns, LB and Ashford on the way up to the mountain.
Okay.
Farther from everything, no cell phones, lousy internet, no jobs, just less resources all the way around. Town is got internet, cable TV. It's also got lots of apartment dwellers. You know, you go out to one of our other schools, Weyerhaeuser Elementary, that's horse country. You know, that's bigger houses, bigger lots, wealthier families. So we do have lots of that just within our own district.
No trailer parks. No
Yeah.
apartments.
Okay, so there is that socioeconomic tier, I guess would be called.
And even in town, there's areas of town that's better than other
Yes.
towns.
So the town can be kind of like a skate park, right? You kind of got those kids and you get those kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not much different than most cities. It's
Yeah,
just on a little smaller scale.
Yeah.
You know,
I think if we're gonna be honest though, I don't think, for the most part, I don't think the kids do that. I think the adults do that.
oh, for sure.
Yeah.
You know, like,
absolutely.
that's an adult thing, I
Yeah.
think, more than a kid thing.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah,
like
and
happen once in a while, but I really think that adults recognize those differences.
So let me ask you this, then. How do you learn about those different pockets? Because you're writing policy for the children. Right? So, you know what I'm saying? From the up.
Up the line, up the
I got Billy Joel in my head. Up
the line.
Up the line.
That's our
Up
policy,
the-
town girl.
But you got up, so how do you get that collective to get to that, you know, to that next level, right? And I love and appreciate, not because he's here, but just that growth mindset, knowing that your community does have legacy and that legacy is getting layered on as more and more people come to your, I mean, right, I'm looking like you're the real estate agent where you go before the night. So right, as real estate, right, like, so how are you thinking about and in being inclusive, using equity, racial equity, identity equity in that? So how do you learn about that? I think that's one of the things, like how do you create that learning culture so you can be, right, continue that legacy?
But I think it plays, the data plays with that, in that, looking at what our demographics are, so the data will show that. And also, your knowledge is because you have been here and they've all been here, and so that type of historical information that they already have embedded in their mind kind of plays a role in that. But I think the demographic data will also help with that.
So I guess this is just what I'm wondering. So what you're saying is we need to be building policies for that 7th generation, those who might be moving into our district. How do we know how to help those students if we're not interacting with, is that what you're saying? Like,
Yeah.
pretty much we're predominantly a white community, predominantly.
Predominantly, yeah.
And so how do we know how to best serve students that we don't have a Latino population? Right? It's not an intentional issue.
No, it's,
No,
yeah, how do you learn so you can write, you know, better, more intentional, more inclusive policy? Because those students represent your school, right? Those communities are your community, right? And so it's, you know, just staying in that learning growth that growth mindset, right?
Well, I've been in this new position, reading a lot of policy that's pertaining to my title here, and it's not the policy, sometimes it's bad, it's the enforcement and the I don't know, what I'm trying to say, the way it plays, the policy plays, or the lack of following the policy. I mean, and then that becomes all of our responsibility. Because I think we have some really wonderful policies that have been rewritten and recently, but then, you know, do all the teachers understand the policy? How does that play out? How does that really look if we follow it? And I
But do
think,
they even know that it exists? Sometimes we
Right.
write policies that staff don't even know that it exists. And so I think it comes from, again, from the school board and the superintendent to really have an intentional information to all the staff about those type of policies that we have. Because I don't think that we do a good job with that, like, in my opinion. From
how do we
the
live
last
it?
3 years.
How do we make it live?
Yeah.
How to make the policy really alive?
Well, and I was just gonna say, there are so many policies, right? So prioritizing
Yes.
Mhm.
specific ones around your strategic plan and around language.
Yes.
Around there. And then, having a policy there for someone, but it's the language that we use for all children, equitable for all children, access for all children, not just some children, not the children that have been raised here and have a legacy, who know how to navigate the system, who know what, May Day is about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know what that was. And I know, Brad. Like, there are things that people know about and new people do not know about. So what other things are there? May Day's like one that just kind of slaps you in the face when you come to May Day. You're like, oh my goodness, I don't even know what this is. But what are the subtle things that are happening? That, I was just thinking outreach for our families of color. We do not do an intentional outreach for really any new people in any specific way, I wouldn't say.
Yeah, no.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
I totally agree with that.
we don't have
And it isn't just,
multicultural celebration here. Even though we're predominantly white, we don't celebrate this multicultural event.
No, I think a big problem with policy too, you're all right. They're not all well understood or even known. And I think that's because a lot of policies come from the top and just roll downhill. And speaking from a fire service perspective, we are really trying for the last 10 years to get away from that and write less policy and encourage more of a cultural do the right thing kind of mentality. And yeah, when you just, we have a book of 18,000 policies, you can't know those, you can't practice them all. It's, in my opinion, it's, a huge policy book is just setting yourself up for failure on a lot of fronts. I think the things we're talking about, come from culture, and I don't have the easy answer on how to make a culture take root here in Eatonville, but it's just a policy book is, I think, as much a hindrance as a benefit sometimes.
Yeah, the policy book protects you from lawsuits and liability, where what you need is a culture change. People actually practice what the intent of the policy is.
Yes. We always center our policy because that's where we unintentionally put some systemic things, but it's about building that culture. That is what's going to be the ripple effects. So we might talk about policy in that way, but this is the real work, is these conversations about how we're going to build this culture, how we're going to build this thinking. So it's not just about how do we build that policy, but it's how do we implement that? How do we implement the culture of thinking and kind of checking each other on like, sometimes you might not know what, a person of color might feel in your thinking, or you might have that not representation of someone that within these identities, but it's being able to go, let's think about this. And how do we bring them in the conversation to build that culture? And also recognizing that maybe they're not in your communities right now, but when your kids leave, they're going to meet people within these different social identities. And how are they going to be able to build that level of going, this is a really beautiful thing to learn and engage versus, get stuck on some stereotypes or prejudice, being able to critically think about that. So this is about building that culture that we've been talking about. I love this. I'm gonna actually speed through a couple things because I want to go to building our why, which is exactly where you're going. So I'm gonna bear with me.
Okay, police time check is 6:15.
Yep, that's where okay. Just real quick, I'm gonna go back to this slide real quick, and so we can talk about our why. So I do want to say the reason why PSESD and why we offered us for us to think about why we lead with racial equity is because if you intersect any of these identities with race and you looked at the most harm that's being done, it's usually the highest predictor is based on race. So our little ones with disabilities and you intersect that with race, those are usually a predictor for who's going to be in those classrooms is race. When you intersect that with gender, women of color, specifically Black, Indigenous people of color, who's paid less in positions across within our education system and beyond. So that's why we lead with race. Does not mean we end with race. So I just want to make that clear when we talk about leading with racial equity. It's not we're only going to talk about race and nothing else. It's that we recognize that's a reliable predictor on when you intersect that with any identity, and that should not be the case. So I'm going to go. So let's talk about our why, and I think that's where you're getting at. And Brad, if you want to, do you want to start this off while I get the video ready?
Yes. So
Okay.
We're talking about equity and what feels good and great for most of us, self-included, is usually when we have the opportunity to operate on an external lens, meaning that I get the opportunity to go in, do something to make something else better, right? That is for the most part, the easiest part of the work. The hardest part of the work is the leadership of self. So we're going to make some things pretty clear and have data to back it up. When folks walk into a room, like if someone's walking into a room, the first thing they're going to know and identify is people's race. Period. That's the number one thing. And there's nothing wrong with that because I do too. It's just the way we're, right? The second thing is what? Gender, right? So, no judgment. She's not a
Just curiosity.
No,
Why did you say that?
It's the biology.
Anatomy and
It's been a long week.
Fuel the conversation.
So I say that to say, this is what we notice, and that is 100% okay. There's nothing wrong with that, right? The thing is now that you've assessed that, your brain is making all these decisions, you have to investigate what you're thinking, what you believe, and then what are your actions. Because some of that is conscious and some of that's unconscious. I'm gonna go sit where I'm safe. I'm gonna go sit because this might mean this. Like, those are the little things that become part of your, right? As opposed to, well, I don't know what that would be. Maybe I should go over and sit beside, right? She might be just a hair older than I am, but I'm gonna go sit beside, right? But those are the things too that we do to people based on our beliefs. And we do have beliefs that, older folks can't change. We do have beliefs that young people don't know that crap. Like, we hold, right? I mean, we have a slew of millennial jokes, but I'm like, all of those things we hold and we operate on, but they play out. And they play out in other ways, whether it's race, whether it's gay, straight, but those are the things that's our work, right? And when we say systems, you guys are part of the system. You're like the head of the system. And so how you model and message that. And I did not feed her that, but I love the fact that she says outreach. Being a leader isn't waiting to what comes to your door. It's not waiting for something bad to happen in your district before, sorry, Jeff, I'm saying some bad words here, before you write a policy.
There's a place for it.
It's not a lot.
Right.
But I think that's the culture. And I forget what I was saying. It's like the policy is kind of like the floor. It's not the roof, right? Mm-hmm. It's from which you operate out of. And so when we start talking about leadership, the first leadership is of self. right? And so whenever there's problems within your house, what we like to do as adults is like to start blaming kids. But if we took some mirror moments, there's some opportunities we could have done some things to help, right? I know we don't like saying that, don't tell the kids we said that, but that's true, right? So that's kind of how school system is. And it's not meant in terms of right or wrong, it's meant in terms of how do we continue to grow and get better for our kids, for the 7th generation, right? So when we come back here 20 years and we see your grandbabies running around here or whoever, like, but they're in a better place. Like, that's what everyone in this room wants, right? And they want to say. So that starts with leadership yourself, and the rest is, others, how, et cetera. Please, you go ahead. That's my favorite part. I'm done.
Yeah, it's just centering our why. So then the how and what comes, it will come with that. It will ripple effect from knowing your why. The leadership to self is knowing your why, and that will build the culture that you're all talking about. And being able to interrogate your personal why in doing this work. So what we're trying to, how do we build capacity for doing this work around things that you might not know about, right? Like an identities and communities that you're not sure about. And it's being vulnerable. And vulnerability is not a weakness. It's been taught, unfortunately, as a weakness, but it's not. And the uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure we face every day are not an option. It's not optional. Our only choice is a question of an engagement. Our willingness to our own and engage with our vulnerability determines the depth of our courage and the clarity of our purpose. The level of which we protect ourselves from being vulnerable is a measure of our fear and connect. And so when you know your why, that's when you can kind of start going in and, like, no matter what, like, your why, that's like your rooted self. And whatever happens, and people are going to, like, well, why are you doing this? When you're going to say, it's for the 7th generation. That is part of my why. You're not going to be shook. And so I'm going to do one quick video, and then we'll be able to do our why. Okay, so let me stop share. And then share. Oops, nope. Where is it?
I'm feeling her right now. Feel it.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of like the Zoom better.
Yeah, me too.
It's much easier.
Yes.
Don't tell people.
How do I know?
A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do I know, they always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do?
The question you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know,
like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose.
So I can do comedy. I can write
books.
I can be in a movie because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out.
Luciana, can you mute yourself?
Oh.
We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time.
Perfect, thank you.
What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do. How do I know? A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do I know, they always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie, because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out called Michael Jr. Break Time. We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do stand-up comedy, in case you didn't know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's, you know, it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm gonna show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I'm like, all right, you're a musical instructor, you know, can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director?
Yes,
Cool.
sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, once you give me the version, is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Right now I'm found, was blind, but now I see.
Okay. Here's what I want you to catch. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose.
So we show that because that's really how you build culture, is really being firm and centered in your why I'm doing this work. And it's going to get tough, right? There's going to be people that are like, you know, resistance is going to happen, but it's building that why. And so I know I have 1 minute left, but if you all could start, like, even if you start writing, this is my why. And my biggest suggestion is take some time and think about it and share it with each other. And being able to kind of build not only your why in doing this work as individuals, but as a collective. So when you're able to kind of think, like, not just about implementing that policy, it's about building that culture to implement that policy to be the best that it can be. And so this is why this work is so important with our why, because it's not about getting something right. It's about being in our center of why. And I'm going to also say my why used to always start and end with my nieces, and now it's deepened. Because if I love all the kids that I'm serving in our region, like I love my nieces, that looks very different. And the ripple effects could happen because of that much love I have. And my why, they're like centered in my why. I don't waver because I think, oh my gosh, if this happened to my niece, that's my indicator. What would I do? But that is deepening your why. And that's where we go back to that growth and what you were talking about, speaking your truth, because it will evolve. And it's being able to but your why will evolve and get deeper and rooted deeper into you. But what will, that your why will, you will never get shook or uprooted if your why is solid rooted in the ground, in the earth, like a tree. All right, Brad.
You know what? I think we needed to hear that today.
Yeah.
Yes, we did. I know that I needed to hear that, and I would imagine every board member as well. That was great.
So in our closing, really quickly, we usually do like a one-word close. And so you can do a one-word close. And just because some of this maybe new, you can say, you know, what was new, what you're curious about, but then really succinct. And then if you're feeling like, you know, what's an action step you're thinking about doing? But really just really trying to keep it to one word and boop, 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 hop around. So one word, what was curious or a new learning, and if you're thinking about action step. Diana, take us away.
One word, you know, I don't know if it's the song or the wonderful conversation, but peace. And my action steps is just to move forward with my work and try to make it better for all the kids in Eatonville and seventh generation too.
Well, I'll go if we're gonna do a circle. My word is hope. I think I'm very, very in that frame right now. But I'm curious about that seventh generation. I don't know if I have understood that concept before, but it resonates with me. But I like having words around it. I like that. Mm-hmm. And my action step is I'm going to go out there and see those football players out there because they're going to reiterate the fact that we can do this together. And we've got to do this for kids. We can't let them down. They're watching us every day.
One word. I think my one word today would be better. Not to imply that things are necessarily bad, but there's things can always be done better. I have always liked finding a better way to do things, different ways to do things. And, you know, I'm not certain about my next step, but just to keep listening and learning, and I'm kind of hoping that steps will become apparent.
I'm sorry, but those are the most important. If you're listening and learning, now you can write policies that, you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Those are the most important.
All right, I guess my one word would be leadership. Right here, and then the community here is looking at people in this room to help develop policy that's inclusive, that clearly voiced a concern, and that we weren't doing that. I think really, at least for me personally, my next action step is introspection. See where I need improvement, and I'm sure that all of us want the same outcome, and it's how each of us can bring something different to the table to achieve the goal.
I think for me, it's acceptance. I'm willing to accept what we're going through right now. And I think if I can cheat, I would also use the word believe. So believe that we can move on from this hard time.
I think for me, the word, the word that's been on my heart for a long time now, that is gratitude. I'm grateful for the opportunity that we're being given to make change and to help every child become the best they can be. This has been my passion for many, many years.
I think my word is reflective. I think we're talking about and really being thoughtful or introspective. My curiosity is how do we learn to serve a student population we don't have yet in our district? And my action step is to learn more, to take a personal responsibility, to learn more, to get deeper into the things that
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We're pretty
It's not overdue.
Yeah, no, right?
Word of distinction, baby.
I didn't know what, you know what, I didn't know what to expect. I expected, well, I do know, I expected a little more traditional dodgeball. I'm just being, if we're gonna be honest, let's be honest. I mean, that's what I was expecting. Because no one is gonna necessarily force you to change. You're gonna get angry parents, you're always gonna have upset parents. But my God, if you don't believe and you don't have a why, I mean, you can sit here and wait for your turn around and keep kicking the inappropriate, unequitable can down the road. But you better believe it's not your children, your grandchildren are gonna pay for it, right? And the fact that, you know, you're here today and putting some things on the line is great for all kids. Whether you're from up the line or not. That's all. I'll put it back in your hands. Thank you so much for having us today.
Well, thank you, Dad, and thank you, please. I tweeted and put you guys on Facebook, so I just want to say this is the best Friday night I've had in so, like, I have missed all of you in person, and this really has, I know, touched all of our hearts.
And tell Debbie thank you for setting everything up and the ceremony.
Yes.
Yeah, I will.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And thank you, Feliciana, for
Yes.
giving up a Monopoly game on
Yeah.
vacation.
Yeah, right?
You know, the funny thing is I'm actually on the base of Mount Hood. So we're usually around your area, but this time we're over here at Mount Hood. And my family grew up on by the base of Mount Hood. So when you talk about the community that you're speaking of, I feel like that was my childhood. So I'm a product of a majority white community that I was one of the only kids of color in, except my cousins. And that did not teach about anything because they were too scared to. So I just want to say, like, and this community is huge to me. So my nieces are still around here. So they mean the world to me. In fact, my niece advocated for Oregon to have non-hate symbols online and offline and in the classroom. So people who didn't have to deal with discrimination. And she is from a community just like yours. And so I know your kids can change the world and will change the world.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
And do we have a follow-up date?
Do we?
Not yet.
Another date?
Not yet.
Our next
yet.
meeting?
No, not yet.
Okay, so we'll work on that.
100%, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just get home and stay away from cougars right now.
Yeah.
I heard you say that. I'm like, oh, okay.
I know.
There's cougars out here? I'm like, oh, Lord. One more thing to worry about.
Haven't seen any of my trail cam in a couple of weeks.
In a couple of weeks.
They are there. I mean, they're in town now. They left this place.
Yeah.
Now we're here.
We got one over by our.
All right, you
place
guys.
Jeff, do you need to do the adjournment?
Thank you.
What are you doing?
Have a good night.
right now. Yeah.
Tyler.